So, I would like to talk about why Europe appears to be going completely mad over Ukraine. Because I don't know whether anyone's noticed, but Keir Starmer looks like he's in the Führer bunker. Like the Russians are literally coming over the hills and are about to storm Berlin. And actually, nothing like that's happening. Actually, nothing really has changed at all, actually. There's been no particular significant movement or action. What has happened is people have spoken. There's been talking, and it's making them all freak out. And I'm going to explain why they're all freaking out. Because a lot of people seem to... Well, a lot of people just looking at the way that all of Europe is responding to the Trump administration, and they don't understand why these things are going as they are. And so I'm going to explain it. And one of the things you should do is go and get the latest copy of Islander, because this is actually kind of core to the analysis. There's a lot of essays in there that will explain the different forms of political impulse that underpin everything that we do, and the Europeans have one, and the Americans and actually the Russians have another, and that's why we've arrived at the point that we've arrived at. So just to give a quick explainer from Full Fact here, which is nice, the last time there were any sort of threat of a peace deal in Ukraine, because just to remember, all of Europe has been 100% on board with total war against Russia in Ukraine.
Certainly the states have, not necessarily the citizens themselves.
The governments of Europe. Yeah, I should make that clear. I'm talking on a state level here. I'm not talking on a citizenry level, because what choice do we have in all this? And there was no threat of peace in Ukraine.
Threat of peace?
Yeah, no, that's literally what happened in 2022 when Boris went over and scuppered it, right?
You know what's really threatening? Peace.
Yeah, no, no, it is. And I'll explain why they view peace as threatening as well, actually. So Boris went and interceded there. And so this changed on February the 12th when Trump got in and was like, look, Vlad, we need to sort this out. Can't have people dying forever. And so they had a 90-minute call where they agreed that they've both got shared interests in making peace come about. And nobody has been more threatened by that than the European Union and Keir Starmer. So this has been something that's very, very much upset them. Rubio and Lavrov went to Riyadh on the 18th of February to have a preliminary talk about these things. Zelensky is not happy about this because he wasn't involved. Then Trump started attacking Zelensky, frankly, in ways I thought were just unfair. Zelensky isn't a dictator.
There's a reason for it, of course, because the Biden administration never once called Vladimir Putin during the entire thing.
Yeah.
And so the strategic play, whether you like it or not, is that Trump thinks he can butter up Vladimir Putin so that he's going to make him more likely to come to the negotiating table and make concessions, whereas he already recognizes that Europe has financially and morally doubled down on Zelensky at every available opportunity, so he's trying to take a couple of cards away from Zelensky, give them to himself, and make it look like Vladimir Putin has more to do.
Yes, but the primary thing is he's essentially bullying Zelensky. He's basically saying, no, you are going to be under my thumb, you are in that place, shut up, or I will literally bully you on Twitter.
Rather than lunch money, it's minerals, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And Zelensky has capitulated to Trump's demands on this. But that's kind of ancillary to what's happening here. But anyway, so yeah, Pete Hegseth, US Defense Secretary, said, look, you're not getting your 2014 borders back. Russia is going to take the Russian-occupied and Russian population of Ukraine over to Russia. And this is something that is just going to be the way it is. Because there is an argument from the Russian side that, hang on a second, promises were made to us, and so this is why Trump said that Ukraine provoked the war. It's a controversial thing, but there is an argument to it, and I'm not saying I necessarily endorse it, and I would say I don't support an invasion or something like that, but this isn't about what ought to be. This is about what really is. And so they point out that, in 2007, basically, the conversation between Georgia and Ukraine entering NATO was essentially put on the table and began percolating through the institutions. And of course, Russia invaded Georgia in, was it 2022? Can't remember. When did Russia invade Georgia?
I'll look it up.
And so you can see this is a part of a long-standing pattern of what Russia would say is defensive actions against the expansion of NATO, right? Okay, fair enough.
Apparently 2008.
Was it 2008?
Crimea was 2014, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it was Georgia 2000? I thought it was for some reason, I feel that it was much more recent than that.
It's just the way time's going.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. But the point is, since this point, you can see that the Russians have been making, from their perspective, what are defensive moves to secure areas from becoming part of NATO, right? Because in 2007, this was all floated and started going into the system, but nothing's actually happened, right? And Hegseth on the 12th of February said that, look, the US doesn't believe NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement, whereas, of course, Zelensky is actively asking for that, and, of course, all of the European leaders are like, oh, yeah, we definitely want Ukraine in.
Well, Kamala Harris, right before the invasion happened, promised it.
Yeah.
So...
And this has been something that Putin has been guaranteed by various American administrations would not happen, because he views it as being NATO being too close to his own borders, which, again, you don't have to like Russia or agree with him to understand why he would feel that way in his position, right? So, anyway, when it comes to the negotiations, it does seem that the Russians have won the war, which isn't terribly surprising given that Ukraine's like a quarter of the size of Russia, and Putin had clearly been preparing his economy to deal with this. And so when America starts putting sanctions on Russia, actually it just leads to inflation over here, because Russia produces huge amounts of raw materials, huge amounts of fertilizer, huge amounts of food.
Costs on goods actually went down in Russia, didn't they? So
yes.
It became cheaper.
Yeah, and so everyone was well aware that Putin had basically judo flipped the West using our own reliance on their... And, I mean, look at Germany's energy problems and things like this, right? So Putin knew that this was coming, and he had prepared for it. We were not prepared for it, and the sanctions didn't work, right? And so Trump has been like, look, okay, yeah, fair enough. They've won this war. Let's just come to the table and talk about it. They're taking lots of territory. They hold all the cards. Now, this made Keir Starmer freak out, right? Absolutely freak out. And you probably saw him delivering this speech like a hostage negotiation. Like someone would literally like, Keir, you have to read this on camera now. No, we don't, no time to prepare. Read these things now, right? And so we'll go through just, it was embarrassing, right? And there's a kind of like, just a domino effect where it's like catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. And so we'll go through some of these because it's just remarkable, right? So he says to Ukraine, okay, the UK is with you today and every day, from His Majesty the King to the NHS workers volunteering hospitals in Ukraine to the communities that took Ukrainian refugees to their heart. That's why I signed a 100-year partnership with Zelensky last month. Because we believe in Ukraine's fight today, the country's incredible potential to thrive in the years to come. I don't give a damn. I don't care about Ukraine at all. But they view it as part of their kind of imperium, right? Ukraine was due to become another part of the European Union, and we'll get into that in a bit more. But notice how it's like the country's incredible potential to thrive.
Part of this can be chalked up to virtue signalling. I believe that they genuinely believe it.
I believe they think this.
But of course, when Starmer says, I'm going to station 30,000 troops in Ukraine, he's not going to do it. He knows that he can make these commitments while actually we're under the thumb of the global American empire. And until recently, the Americans have supported
this is all
progressive expansionism. So now, rather than 30,000 British troops being stationed there, or NATO troops, Trump will selectively station NATO troops to protect his mineral reserves, rather than just protect Ukraine and its borders.
To be fair, that's probably what they would have always done anyway. It would have, I think, been largely symbolic. But
it'll be scaled down. And also Trump will then be able to say, I've kept my promise not to station any more American servicemen overseas, while also using the EU and NATO as a glorified security force.
Sure. But the point is he just views Ukraine as an economic zone, which is not surprising considering Keir Starmer is a arch materialist. But he says Russia does not hold all the cards in this war because the Ukrainians have the courage to defend their country. But there are far fewer Ukrainians left to defend their country. Like, you have to accept at some point that you run out of manpower, you ghoul. And he says because Russia's economy is in trouble. No, Russia's economy doesn't seem to be in trouble. And because they...
Self-sufficient, aren't they, as far as I'm aware?
Yeah, because we made them be self-sufficient.
We've also driven them into the arms of BRICS, and the entire purpose of Trump's resource grab is to ensure that, one, America becomes a proper economic challenge to BRICS in terms of raw materials, but two, that it can try and pry Russia back away from allying with BRICS.
Yeah. And he says because they've lost the best of their land forces and their Black Sea fleet in this pointless invasion. It's like, I've seen various estimates, somewhere between 160 to 500,000 men. I mean, that's a lot of men, but it's Russia. Russia's way of war has always been attritional. They don't care.
Also, their equipment was cheaper to produce than the stuff supplied to the Ukrainians by the Brits, Europe, and America.
And they have now a full wartime economy that they've been roaring on for 3 years.
And also their equipment is uniform, which is a lot
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
things a lot
yeah.
easier when you're a military.
Yeah.
And if it's coming from all of the European countries and America, it's more difficult to train troops to use that stuff.
Yeah. So Keir Starmer appears to basically be delusional at this point. I mean, it just seems to be wishful thinking. I want it to be that Russia's economy is failing and all of their men are dead and their equipment is all broken and they've got no fleet. No, I don't think that's true, Keir. And so he says, look, so what we're going to do is step up our military support to Ukraine. We're going to provide another $4.5 billion in military aid. It's like, right, so Keir Starmer intends for the war to continue. Right? That's what he's saying. And same with the EU. They think the war is going to continue under European auspices rather than with the backing of the United States. We're going to train even more Ukrainian troops and help them mobilize even further. So for Keir Starmer, there is no end to this that isn't a total Russian withdrawal from everything. Right? He will sacrifice every man, woman, and child in Ukraine if it means Vladimir Putin loses a foot of ground that he has taken, which is mad until you understand what he thinks he's fighting for. Right? Secondly, he's going to keep up the economic pressure. He's going to make a series of why is the word not on the tip of my tongue? I literally just used it. Sanctions to force Putin to make concessions, which I think he's going to do that. And then he's going to bring the collective strength to the peace effort. It's like, okay, what's that even mean? This is all nonsense. You are totally delusional, and you think that this is going to be the case. And he says, quote, a patient called Petro from the burns unit I visited in Kyiv said to me, if Ukraine falls, Europe will be next.
Can Russia take over all of Europe?
No.
After a long, drawn-out war with Ukraine? I don't think so.
I mean, Russia couldn't even take all of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, that's not going to happen.
And also, the border's going to be militarized and people are going to expect another potential incursion, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're going to be prepared for one.
Exactly.
But it's not going to happen. Russia, like, it's not going to... Like, Keir Starmer is acting, and he says in other places, like, he thinks Britain will be directly under threat from Russia, and it's like, that's not going to happen, Keir.
There's kind of a whiplash that we get, which is inducing, I think, our collective apathy here, which is that Keir Starmer is attempting to sound Churchillian. I mean, Boris Johnson explicitly tried to fashion himself as Churchill, which is why the peace deal was scuppered. And so we're locked in this idea that it is permanently 1938 and that anything other than militarizing Ukraine until the heat death of the universe is considered appeasement. But the problem is they've got this attitude of Churchillian foreign policy abroad, and then appeasement to every single tribal minority they import into our country at home. So they're literally Chamberlain at home, Churchill abroad. Yes. And so why should we care about being Chamberlain? Why should we care about being Churchill abroad if you're currently destroying my home at home? Hence the sort of apathy of us lot around here. Yeah. So, but
it's also too late for appeasement when you're 3 years into the war. Like, appeasement happens before the war, idiots. But anyway, moving on. So obviously, Keir Starmer is convinced that this means we're going to go to war with Russia, and so he's willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, as if the Russians are worried about the British military with its like 72,000 men. Like,
we do have a good military,
but
sure we're not necessarily. It would be in a peacekeeping thing, so we're not going to be, in the front lines. Yeah. as I understand it, anyway.
No, I'm not saying the British military isn't good. What I'm saying is it's tiny, right? It is absolutely tiny. Like Britain's got like something like 2 or 3 times the population we had when we had a world empire, and now we have half the manpower in our army, right?
We've got the lowest reserve since the Napoleonic War.
Yeah, and exactly. Like, I mean, we are not a fearsome military power, and so like, imagine Vladimir Putin going, "Oh, Britain's going to deploy 30,000 men." Piss off, Like, Russia's got 600,000 men in Ukraine at the moment, right?
He can get away with saying this because it's performative. Because basically, we're just
it's not.
The Americans
No. It's not just performative. Because if you watch him speaking, he is speaking through conviction, and saw him in Question Time yesterday. Like the Labour front bench looked like they were on the verge of having to go to war with Hitler. right? They looked deathly. This to them is deeply serious and is representative of the end of a world order, and it frightens them, and they are genuinely thinking that it might happen to be 1938 again, and actually they're going to go to war with Putla over there, right? Even though, yeah, but
He's still working his mustache.
well, no, that's the thing. Like a normal person who's not invested in either side, we're just looking. Okay, Putin's war goals are fairly realistic, and he seems to have achieved them. Our war goals are mental, and we will never achieve them. And yet our guys are doubling down and will fight forever until every single Ukrainian has been wiped from the map.
I'm very cynical about this, though. I think everyone in any position of power knows that it's all rhetoric and it's not actually real.
I don't know, because you can see the tension in Starmer's face when he's talking about this. They really, unlike the EU guys, like there's a reason when Vance went to the EU, one of them started crying. Like this is emotionally real to these people, and they really believe in what they're saying. And I'll explain why in a second.
We had a conversation with one person whose position we can't disclose. This was last year, and he said never underestimate the level to which like boomers in either the US State Department or the UK Foreign Office and that were eager to get their go against the Soviet Union. Like some of the people were actually stationed at the Berlin Wall and never got to trade shots with the Russians, and so they now see this as their chance. It's like Russia as an entity, even though it's completely different, haunts the boomer mind.
It totally does.
And so therefore that's driving our foreign policy.
Why does every problem in the world stem to the boomers' unrealistic view of the world?
As Napoleon said, when revolution comes, never trust a man below the age of 40. Over the age of 40, rather.
Yeah, that's true. But anyway, so Keir Starmer today published this in the Mail. Putin's aggression threatens us at home. He's arguing in this that literally Russians are going to rock up with soldiers on British shores and they will take us over. It's like, that's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. You sound delusional, and yet this is the Prime Minister's forward-facing position.
Totally unbothered by Islamic subversion currently happening.
Yeah, no, they don't care about any of that, right? Because that's part of the plan.
Yep.
Right? That's all part of the plan. That's normal for what we are. It's not normal that Putin is able to do what he's doing. Some things are planned for and regulated, and other things are not. And that's the thing that he's so bothered about. And so the last thing he wants is an unregulated world, and that's what Putin is threatening. Right? Macron has ruled out, but he's also in other places said, yes, I will. Scholz, before he got ousted, was saying, we're going to do stuff. In fact, I've got a thing on Scholz here.
Well, he's probably going to be the coalition partner as well. So.
Yeah, and Scholz, he's going to hang around in the background even if nothing else. But he says, look, we don't want an independent European force. We want the NATO forces doing it because we want it to be a big coalition. Lithuania's defense minister said that, look, Trump was right about Europe's defense spending and military strength. Whether we don't want to hear it, but it is true that Europe isn't really in a position to do this itself, which is why Scholz is like, well, we need NATO behind us, right? But this is leading to a rift. And so we ended up seeing this rift at a UN resolution that was recently passed. So it looks like what's going to happen is Trump and Putin are going to negotiate a peace. Whether this holds or not is anyone's guess. But it is the liberal international establishment that is freaking out about it because of the nature of what's being done here. Because I mean, this was the most pathetic thing in the world. It shows you the UN, right? Is the instantiation of the global rules-based order is a nothing. It's an absolute nothing. Apart from it's kind of like an emotional support system for the. No, I really mean this.
Like a llama they take on the planet.
I'm laughing because I agree.
I'm not joking. It's basically like this emotional support meetings they have, right? And so there was a resolution that was passed in the UN to end the Ukraine war, and Russia and the United States both voted against this, and this made them freak out. It's like, well, hang on a second. Why isn't the US voting with us? It's like, because Trump is going to do this in a different way to you, right? They sit down, they want their rules-based order. So, right, we're going to sit there, we're going to sign these, everyone's going to agree on the rules. And Trump has said, no, I'm just going to literally speak to Putin and we're going to get it done. And that's it. I don't need your rules-based order, right? So what we are looking at here is two ways of running the world. We've got the imperium of the international liberal rules-based order, which was the European Union, Biden's America, Canada, the Anglosphere, the West, whatever you want to call it.
Five Eyes, yeah.
The Five Eyes. Like, imagine that placed out on a map, right? And opposed to that, you say that's in green. That's us. That's the good guys, the liberal. We sit down at the UN and have these resolutions. Me.
Basically globalism.
Yeah, but it's managerial globalism, right? And then alternative to that, So that is the sphere of the end of history, like the Francis Fukuyama types. And then outside of that, you have the great men of history. You have the Putins. You have various other sort of dictators, Kim Jong-uns and stuff like this, who act politically in a way that is counter to the rules-based order. They don't care. Why do I don't need a rules-based order. What I have is political power that I'm going to exercise using my will and the force that we have behind it. And Trump is one of those guys.
So is, again, like him or not, Netanyahu as well.
Yep,
so the Israelis have done the exact same thing. Is they've disregarded the UN resolutions, the International Court of Justice, the Biden administration trying to rein them in, and just said, no, we're just going to bomb the absolute hell out of Gaza and turn it into a parking lot until Hamas and Hezbollah are gone.
Yes.
And it's only through Trump saying, I'll help you manage the Gazan problem, making a deal, that this has been brought to an end. So
Exactly.
Well, it's hard power versus soft power as well, isn't it?
It's not just that. It's not that the international rules-based order can't use hard power. It absolutely can. What it's about is the method by which you approach resolving problems. And so they are what, in fact, I'm going to use Karl Mannheim's Ideology and Utopia to give us a theoretical framework on this. So Mannheim points out that the bourgeois liberal is a rationalist, and he wants to use reason to solve every problem. And so he addresses in this whether there could be such a thing, therefore, as scientific politics. Now, this is what they all want to do, right? They want a science of politics.
Political science already exists.
Yeah, but it's such a misnomer.
It is.
It's such a misnomer.
No science being done.
They want to set the business of the state on rails.
Precisely, right? And in fact, he's got a great quote here that I'm going to read. It says, every social process may be divided into a rationalized sphere consisting of a settled and routinized procedures in dealing with situations that recur in an orderly fashion, and then the irrational by which it is surrounded. We are therefore distinguishing between the rationalized structure of society and the irrational matrix. And already you can see how this applies to world politics, right?
This is why they call Trump and Putin a madman.
Exactly. And this is why they say Trump and Putin love each other and they're kissing. It's like, because they act in the same way. Obviously, they're rivals. They're obviously rivals, just they come from a different paradigm. Trump comes from this irrational paradigm, and they are rationalistic. And again, this carries on. It's just so good. The chief characteristic of modern culture is the tendency to include as much as possible in the realm of the rational, as in the ever-pervasive nature of bureaucracy that wants to literally bureaucratize absolutely everything about your life. They can't help it. To reduce the irrational element to the vanishing point, right? And so he says conduct, therefore, in the sense that we use it, means that it doesn't really begin until we reach the area of the irrational. So everything up until this point is rules-based. And so you don't really need to, you follow the rules or you don't follow the rules. The nature of your character doesn't matter, right? And that's very important to the rules-based order, which is why they literally bring in God knows how many foreigners and say, well, look, who cares about their character? If they're following the rules, they're fine. It's like, no, I don't want this guy on 3 different bloody speakerphones like Samson had on the train in today. Blah, 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 blah. No, it's the character. The conduct of these people matters, right? But these people don't see that, and they don't think this way. All they're thinking is, right, no, we've systematized, we've rationalized, we've rule-based all of this, and therefore this is all fine. And where we have dominion of the rules, there is good and there is order. Where we don't have dominion of the rules, we have chaos. And that's what Trump is promising them.
In Schmittian terms, they're rendering things apolitical because they presume them to be neutral, they presume them to be settled, they presume them to be on rails, and they are terrified of Trump, Putin, Xi, for various reasons, acting in their own expressly national political interest.
Yes, and this is what Francis Fukuyama actually talks about in The End of History and The Last Man. So Fukuyama gets a lot of stick, but actually I think his analysis is basically correct on the way that these things are done. And so he begins it on the sort of Platonic tripartite soul of reason, spirit, and the appetite. So reason is, of course, your rational mind. Your spirit is that part of you that fights when you get punched in the face, that stands up for yourself, that demands dignity and respect and acknowledgement from your peers. It is the part of yourself that holds you to be important, that you view yourself as an important thing. And then, of course, the appetites are your just base pleasures, right?
This is Eros, Thumos, Logos, right?
Yes. Yeah. Or thymos. It's Thymethes. I'm going to call it thymos, which is what Fukuyama calls it. But the point is, you can see how this fits into the different paradigms that we're looking at. Obviously, your reason, the logisticon, is where the European Union wants to live. It's like, no, this is how everything ought to be done. Why? Because we're soft-handed bureaucrats and we're afraid of conflict, and this makes us comfortable. This makes everything predictable. We know what tomorrow is going to be like because we set the rules and everyone's going to follow the rules. And you can see why it meshes so well with the appetites. So yeah, go and be degenerate. Your character does not matter. That you follow the rules is what matters, right? Whereas when you've got someone who comes from the Thymos, like, I mean, literally, like Putin, Trump, you know, any of the sort of great dictators, you know, come from this, but also any of the great politicians. Winston Churchill was someone who comes out of the Thymos. You know, Nigel Farage is a thymotic man. You know, he's not an EU bureaucrat. You know, you can have your criticisms and whatever, but he's one of those guys who's like, no, I care about the history and the dignity of the United Kingdom, and I want to see it sovereign. Blah, blah, right? All this sort of stuff. So it's not that you have to be a bad person to be one of the great men whose order is based in Thymos. But you can see from the other side, well, Obama, Biden, Blair, the Tories, Starmer, they're all Davos men. They're all the international rules-based order guys. They don't live in the Thymos, but they can get on with the appetite. And you, sorry, go on.
It's also worth adding there that in this rational rules-based order, their sort of modus operandi and their reason for doing it in part is to predict the future, as you said. But of course, character, I find, is the better judge of character.
Yes, it is.
Because it predicts future behaviour in a much more reliable way than simply, you know, saying, well, you didn't follow the rules. Well, you're pigeonholing the possibilities there, aren't you? You're not viewing what is possible based on the actual evidence in front of you.
It presumes the universal correct nature of the rules, and it also presumes that the unpredictable, well, what they consider the unpredictable nature of the thymotic politics is actually as unpredictable as you think. And it's actually not. It's actually complete. Like, any idiot can actually predict how it's going to go when, you know, Trump and Zelensky have an argument on Twitter, right? You can feel it in your gut because you're looking at the big dog fighting the small dog.
Yeah, Trump has political pixie dust.
Yeah.
Zelensky doesn't.
But the point of the character, though, this shows everywhere, right? Now, much has been made of Vladimir Putin's relationship with dogs. Right? There was a Chinese guy who was holding this dog by the scruff of its neck, and Putin, like, sees it and goes, oh, no, and goes over and grabs the dog and just... That speaks to his character, right? Now, whether you like Putin or not, you know, he obviously loves dogs, and this is something that is... It shows he's from a different world. Like, I can't imagine an EU bureaucrat would have seen this Chinese guy holding a dog like that and go, oh, no. EU bureaucrat would have stood there and goes, well, I'm not supposed to formally do something.
The complete inverse of this would be that Starmer's stage-managed, very quick laying of the wreath at Southport and then being whisked away by his handlers. He couldn't do anything spontaneous or emotional.
Yes, and why would he want to? You know, it's not in his character. It's the rules say I lay the wreath. I lay the wreath and then I piss off.
And it's because of a profound inconfidence in himself to be able to set the boundaries of politics.
Exactly.
So he has to stick to the rules, otherwise he loses his position, whereas Putin can basically set up these dog-based photo ops.
It's basically whether you see virtue as being internal or external.
Yes.
Can you be virtuous in yourself, or is it a system in place to encourage virtue?
Is your politics rooted in your Thymos, where you're prepared to fight for the boundaries? Right. I mean, all of this war is Putin fighting for the thymotic boundaries of Russia, saying, no, we as the Russians will have these boundaries and we will fight for them. And the Europeans not liking this. Trump's the same, very much the same when it comes to the McDonald's stuff. This is all like, no, I think this is cool. I think this is, you know, American. This is all in the sort of spirited part of it. His entire like frame is all part of the spirited part. And
it's imminent transcendence.
Yes, yeah, it very much is. And this gets results, right? This gets results. Like, I remember when this happened a few years ago, probably 6 years ago now, whatever it was. And Trump and Kim Jong-un are shaking hands on the demilitarized border between North and South Korea. Everyone was like, this is preposterous. No, this is how thymotic politics works. This is how great man politics works. You know, when you have an understanding that you're both operating the same way, like, this can happen. For example, like, you could see something like this could have happened. I mean, you can see why the Allies and the Soviets were able to get along, right? Because they were both going for this kind of rationalized rule-based order, whether you agree with the Soviet order or not. But you can see why they can get along, because they're speaking to each other the same language. These guys are speaking the same language, even though they're on opposite sides. And what this does is put the rules-based order on notice, right? They are like, oh my God, the great men of history are taking over again. We're screwed.
I read this, and he just said Starmer has to basically pretend to be Churchill.
Yes.
But the problem is you cannot be Churchill because Churchill was thymotic, whereas Starmer is the civil service in a badly fitting suit.
Exactly. But these guys don't understand this. They don't, you know, they would never be able to give you this analysis that I'm giving you. All they can do is react in the way that they react to these things. But say the US is now the enemy of the West. What does that mean? How can America, which is essentially the lodestone of the West, there's a heart of the West at the moment, it's where all Western innovation comes from, it's where the power is, where the money is. How can that be the enemy of the West? Unless the West means the international rationalist, rules-based order that has been, since World War II, projected across the West, and Trump now is like, no, we're just going to do this old style in the same way that like ancient kings would have done it, just out of the thymos. It makes more sense, and it actually makes sense. And it's not just that. Like, you know, foreign policy. Yes, America is Europe's enemy now. So, yeah, it's the enemy of the international rules-based order. Trump wouldn't be the enemy of Napoleon, right? Trump and Napoleon, they might be rivals. They would understand each other. But no, Trump is an existential enemy to the rules-based order because he's prepared to deal with things on his own terms in the way the old world was done. And this is what they're afraid of. This is why they're freaking out. Because what they can see on the horizon is the end of the rational, logisticon-based order. They can see, oh my God, we might have to go into a world of unpredictability where we have to show strength, where we have to project confidence, where we have to actually nurture our own character. And as you can imagine, this is a terrifying prospect to the average Soviet EU bureaucrat. So anyway, I'll leave that there, but I'll probably do a more detailed analysis on this at some point. But I really think this explains why the European Union is about to freak out and do something stupid. Same with Starmer. They're about to freak out and do something really stupid that doesn't have to happen.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.